Sarah Chen pressed her forehead against the cold airplane window, watching Denver International Airport shrink beneath her. The Rocky Mountains stretched endlessly in the afternoon sun, their peaks dusted with early October snow. She'd made this flight, Denver to Boston, at least 40 times in the past 3 years, but today something felt different. A tension in her chest she couldn't quite name. She settled back into seat 14A, pulling out her worn paperback copy of Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, reading about test pilots and astronauts, men who'd pushed the boundaries of flight, while she'd walked away from the one thing she'd ever been truly exceptional at. The woman in 14B smiled politely, already engrossed in her tablet. Across the aisle, a businessman in 14C was hammering away at his laptop, completely absorbed. Behind her, a young mother struggled to calm a fussy toddler. The sounds of a typical Tuesday afternoon flight. Laptop keys clicking, pages turning, bobbies crying, the steady white noise of jet engines humming at cruise altitude. Sarah tried to focus on her book, but the words blurred. Her mind drifted, as it always did on flights, back to the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor. She could still feel it, the raw power of 35,000 pounds of thrust pressing her back into the seat during takeoff, the responsiveness of the stick in her hand, the way the aircraft became an extension of her own body at supersonic speeds. Flying the most advanced fighter jet in the world had been like conducting a symphony of physics and instinct. Captain Sarah Viper Chen, that's who she used to be. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days ago, she'd been one of only a handful of female F-22 pilots in the United States Air Force. She'd flown combat missions over Syria, intercepted Russian bombers in Alaskan airspace, and earned the respect of every pilot in the 4th Fighter Wing at Langley Air Force Base. Her call sign, Viper, had been earned the hard way, through precision, speed, and a strike capability that made her instructors nod with approval. Then came that training exercise over the Nevada desert, a routine dogfight simulation. Her wingman, Captain Jake Polo Morrison, had been her best friend since flight school. They'd flown together for 5 years, trusted each other with their lives. But something went wrong. A mechanical failure. A split-second decision. Jake's ejection seat malfunctioned. Sarah had watched his F-22 spiral into the desert floor. She'd landed her aircraft, filed her reports, attended the funeral, and accepted that it wasn't her fault. The investigation cleared her completely. Mechanical failure, they said. Nothing she could have done. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things entirely. 6 months later, she'd submitted her resignation from the Air Force. Now she was a defense consultant for Morrison Tech Aerospace in Boston, named after some executive's last name, not her dead friend. She spent her days in conference rooms analyzing aircraft specifications and writing reports that other people would use to make decisions. It paid well, almost 3 times her Air Force salary, but it felt hollow, like watching someone else live her life through bulletproof glass. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 40,000 feet. The captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. Feel free to move about the cabin." 40,000 feet. Sarah knew exactly what that meant in terms of air pressure, oxygen levels, and outside temperature. -70 degrees Fahrenheit out there. In her F-22, she'd regularly flown at 50,000 feet, sometimes higher. Up there, you could see the curvature of the earth. Up there, the sky turned from blue to black. Up there, she'd felt truly alive. She shook her head, trying to clear the memories, and forced herself to read. Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier. John Glenn orbiting the earth. Men who'd refused to quit, who'd pushed through fear and doubt to achieve the impossible. Sarah felt a familiar pang of loss, not just for Jake, but for the person she used to be. The woman who'd strapped herself into a $150 million fighter jet and controlled it with the precision of a surgeon. The captain who'd made life-or-death decisions at Mach 2 while enemy missiles tracked her position. That woman seemed like a stranger now. The plane hummed steadily around her. Through the window, she could see the engine on the left wing, the massive turbofan spinning with mechanical perfection. She'd always loved watching engines during flight, the way they operated in perfect harmony, converting fuel and air into thrust, defying gravity through pure physics. But something caught her attention, a subtle vibration in her armrest. Most passengers wouldn't notice it, it was barely perceptible, but Sarah's hands had been trained to detect the smallest anomalies in flight. Years of gripping a fighter stick, feeling every micro-adjustment the aircraft made, had given her a sixth sense for when something wasn't quite right. She sat up straighter, her book forgotten in her lap. The vibration came again, slightly stronger this time. Her eyes fixed on the left engine outside her window. It looked normal, spinning smoothly, no visible issues, but that instinct, the one that had kept her alive through 3 combat tours and countless training exercises, whispered a warning. Pay attention. The businessman in 14C kept typing. The mother behind her finally got her toddler to sleep. The woman in 14B turned another page on her tablet. Nobody else seemed to notice anything wrong. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe 3 years away from flying had made her jumpy. Maybe she was projecting her own anxieties onto a perfectly normal flight. Sarah took a deep breath and looked back down at her book, but she didn't turn the page. Her hand remained on the armrest, fingers spread, feeling for that vibration. And she waited. Because Captain Sarah Viper Chen, former F-22 pilot with 2,000 flight hours and 3 combat tours, knew one thing with absolute certainty. That vibration meant something. And at 40,000 feet, even small problems could become catastrophic in seconds. She just didn't know that in less than 2 minutes, she'd be the only person on United Flight 1247 capable of preventing a disaster. The engine hummed, the plane flew on, and Sarah's instincts screamed louder with every passing second. The vibration intensified. Sarah's fingers pressed harder against the armrest, her entire body now attuned to the subtle wrongness she detected. It was no longer a whisper, it was a growing rumble like distant thunder rolling closer. She glanced around the cabin. Still, nobody else seemed to notice. The businessman typed away. The sleeping toddler snored softly. The flight attendants chatted near the galley, preparing the beverage service. Her eyes locked onto the left engine outside her window. Something was different. The spinning fan blades looked. The explosion came without warning. A deafening bang ripped through the cabin like a cannon shot. Sarah's body slammed against her seatbelt as the entire aircraft lurched violently to the left. Her book flew from her lap, sailing across the aisle. The woman in 14B screamed, her tablet clattering to the floor. Overhead bins burst open, spilling luggage into the aisle. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the cabin into an eerie red glow from the emergency lighting. Through her window, Sarah saw hell itself. The left engine, the number 2 engine in pilot terminology, was disintegrating before her eyes. Flames erupted from the cowling, brilliant orange and white against the blue sky. Chunks of metal turbine blades spun away from the engine like deadly shrapnel, some embedding themselves in the wing. Black smoke poured from the housing, streaming past her window in thick, oily clouds. Oh my God, we're going to die," someone shrieked from the back of the plane. The aircraft dropped. Not a gentle descent, a sickening, stomach-lurching freefall that made everyone weightless for 3 terrifying seconds. Coffee cups flew upward. Phones and tablets floated in the air like astronauts in zero gravity. Then gravity reasserted itself with brutal force, slamming everyone back into their seats. The toddler behind Sarah woke up screaming. His mother was crying, holding him tight, her face pale as snow. Sarah's military training kicked in like a switch being flipped. While everyone else panicked, her mind shifted into combat mode, that ice-cold analytical state she'd honed over thousands of flight hours. She assessed the situation with brutal efficiency. Engine fire confirmed. Complete engine failure confirmed. Asymmetric thrust confirmed. The plane was now flying on one engine, with the dead engine creating drag and pulling them into a potential death spiral. The aircraft was tilting. She could feel it in her inner ear, see it in the way loose objects rolled toward the left side of the cabin. They were in a banked turn, unintentional and dangerous. With one engine producing thrust and the other producing drag, the plane wanted to spin like a frisbee. The businessman in 14C was frozen, his face green, hands gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles were white. The woman in 14B was sobbing, whispering what sounded like prayers in Spanish. Across the cabin, a teenage girl was hyperventilating into a paper bag. A man in his 50s was bent over, vomiting into the air sickness bag. The intercom crackled to life. Captain Webb's voice came through, steady but with an edge of tension that Sarah recognized instantly. She'd heard that tone before, in her own voice, when she'd been hit by surface-to-air missile warnings over Syria. "Flight attendants, please be seated immediately. Flight attendants to your jump seats now." That's when Sarah knew it was worse than bad. That phrase, "Flight attendants, please be seated immediately," was code. It meant the pilots were dealing with an emergency so severe that they couldn't risk anyone standing. It meant they expected turbulence, possible rapid descent, or worse. A flight attendant, young, maybe 25, with the name tag Jennifer, stumbled down the aisle, gripping seat backs for balance as the plane continued its unnatural tilt. Her face was sheet white, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with sweat. She was trying to maintain composure, but Sarah could see the terror in her eyes. "Everyone remain calm," Jennifer said, her voice shaking. "Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened in." Another violent shudder cut her off. The plane lurched again, this time to the right, as if the pilots were fighting to correct the tilt. Jennifer fell, catching herself on Sarah's armrest. Their eyes met for a brief second, and in that moment, Sarah saw something that made her chest tighten: absolute helplessness. Through her window, the engine fire was getting worse. The flames were larger now, licking along the underside of the wing. Sarah had seen enough accident reports to know what came next if that fire reached the fuel tanks in the wing. She'd seen the photographs of the wreckage. She'd attended the memorial services. The altitude indicator on the bulkhead, a small display showing their height for passenger information, was spinning downward. 39,000 feet, 38,500 feet, 38,000 feet. They were descending fast, too fast for a controlled emergency descent. A new sound joined the chaos, a high-pitched whistling like air escaping from a balloon. Pressurization failure. Sarah's ears popped painfully. Around her, other passengers grabbed their ears, crying out in pain and confusion. Then, with a series of mechanical clunks that echoed through the cabin, the oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments. Yellow masks dangled in front of every seat like grotesque party decorations. The recorded announcement began: "Oxygen masks have been deployed. Pull the mask toward you to start the flow of oxygen. Place the mask over your nose and mouth." Pandemonium erupted. Passengers screamed, grabbed for masks with shaking hands, some pulling so hard they ripped the plastic tubing. A man in the back was having a full panic attack, hyperventilating so badly he couldn't get his mask on. Parents struggled to secure their children's masks first, their own faces turning red from oxygen deprivation. An elderly woman 2 rows ahead had frozen completely, staring at her dangling mask with blank, shocked eyes. Sarah pulled her own mask down with practiced efficiency, securing the elastic band behind her head with one smooth motion. The flow of oxygen was immediate, clearing her head, but her focus wasn't on herself, it was on the bigger picture. One engine, fire, descending too fast, possible structural damage from the engine explosion, pressurization failure, and 157 terrified passengers whose lives now hung in the balance. Her hands clenched into fists. She knew aircraft systems. She knew emergency procedures. She'd trained for catastrophic failures at altitude, but she wasn't in the cockpit. She was just another passenger strapped into seat 14A, watching disaster unfold. Except she wasn't just another passenger. She was Captain Sarah Viper Chen. She'd landed damaged aircraft before. She'd made impossible decisions under fire. She'd saved her own life and the lives of her wingmen more times than she could count. And she'd be damned if she was going to sit here and do nothing while this plane fell from the sky. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt. Jennifer, the flight attendant, was struggling back down the aisle toward her jump seat, tears streaming down her face. The plane tilted again, throwing her off balance. Sarah stood, planting her feet wide for stability, and stepped into the aisle. Every instinct she'd spent 3 years suppressing roared back to life. The warrior she'd tried to bury, the pilot she'd tried to forget, that woman was back, and she was going to that cockpit whether anyone liked it or not. Because at 38,000 feet and descending, with one engine on fire and structural integrity unknown, these pilots needed every advantage they could get. And Sarah Chen was about to become their best advantage. Sarah's legs felt like steel pistons as she moved down the tilting aisle. The plane shuddered again, throwing her against a seat back, but she kept moving forward. Behind her, passengers were screaming, praying, some sitting in stunned silence with their oxygen masks dangling uselessly in front of them. The acrid smell of burning metal was seeping into the cabin now, mixing with the sharp tang of fierce sweat and vomit. "Ma'am, you need to sit down." Jennifer's voice was high-pitched, desperate. She'd managed to grab onto a seat and was pulling herself upright, her flight attendant training battling against raw terror. "Federal regulations require." "I know the regulations," Sarah cut her off, her voice hard and commanding. It was a tone she hadn't used in 3 years, the voice of a combat pilot issuing orders that meant the difference between life and death. But right now, those pilots need help. Jennifer's eyes widened. She positioned herself in the aisle, blocking Sarah's path to the cockpit. Despite her fear, she was doing her job. "I can't let you go up there. The cockpit is secure. Please, ma'am, return to your seat immediately or I'll have to." Another violent lurch cut her off. The plane banked sharply left, the dead engine's drag pulling them into a spiral. Passengers screamed. A carry-on bag that had fallen from an overhead bin went sliding down the aisle like a hockey puck, slamming into the galley with a crash. The elderly woman who'd frozen earlier finally started screaming, a high keening wail that raised the hair on Sarah's neck. Through the cockpit door, Sarah could hear muffled shouts, male voices, urgent and strained. They were fighting the aircraft, struggling with controls that probably weren't responding the way they should. She'd been in that situation before, wrestling a damaged plane while alarms screamed and systems failed around her. She knew exactly how alone they felt in that cockpit right now. "Listen to me very carefully," Sarah said, grabbing Jennifer's shoulders and forcing eye contact. The flight attendant flinched but held her ground. "My name is Captain Sarah Chen. I'm a former United States Air Force pilot. I flew F-22 Raptors for 8 years. I have over 2,000 flight hours, 3 combat tours, and extensive training in emergency procedures and damaged aircraft recovery." Jennifer's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I don't. You're just saying that." "4th Fighter Wing, Langley Air Force Base," Sarah continued, her voice rapid-fire but clear. "Call sign Viper. Service number 2847 Golf Charlie. I've landed aircraft with engine failures, hydraulic failures, electrical failures. I've been shot at by surface-to-air missiles and lived to tell about it. And right now, your pilots are dealing with a catastrophic emergency that I have trained for." The plane dropped again, not a gentle descent but a sickening plunge that made Sarah's stomach leap into her throat. For 2 seconds they were in freefall. Luggage exploded from overhead bins. A laptop flew past Sarah's head, missing her by inches before smashing into the bulkhead. Jennifer screamed, grabbing onto Sarah to keep from falling. When the plane stabilized barely, Jennifer was crying, not just fear tears but deep, soul-shaking sobs. "We're going to die," she whispered. "Oh God, we're all going to die." "Not if I can help it," Sarah said fiercely. She softened her grip on Jennifer's shoulders, making it reassuring rather than commanding. "But I need to get to that cockpit. Your captain needs another set of eyes, another brain, someone who understands flight dynamics and emergency procedures. I might be the only person on this plane who can help them land safely." Jennifer stared at her, mascara running down her cheeks, her perfectly coiffed hair now a mess. Sarah could see the calculation happening behind those terrified eyes. Break protocol and risk her job, or follow rules while everyone dies. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Jennifer's voice cracked. "Anyone could say they're a pilot." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out her wallet. Her hands were steady despite the chaos around them, muscle memory from 1,000 emergencies keeping her calm. She flipped it open to her Air Force ID card. Even though she'd resigned, she still carried it. She didn't know why. Maybe because it was the last piece of evidence that Captain Sarah Viper Chen had ever existed. Jennifer stared at the ID, the official Air Force insignia, Sarah's photograph in uniform, the rank, Captain, the words, United States Air Force. "I'm who I say I am," Sarah said quietly. "And every second we waste is a second those pilots are up there alone, fighting an aircraft that's trying to kill them. I've been in that cockpit, Jennifer. I know what they're feeling right now. Let me help." The plane tilted again, groaning like a wounded animal. Metal screamed somewhere in the fuselage. An alarm was blaring from the cockpit. Sarah recognized it even through the door. Master caution. Multiple system failures. Jennifer made her decision. She grabbed the intercom phone mounted on the wall, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She punched in the cockpit code. Sarah noticed she had to try twice. Her fingers kept hitting the wrong buttons. Finally, it connected. "See Captain Webb?" Jennifer's voice trembled. "Sir, there's a passenger who says she's a military pilot, an F-22 pilot. She wants to help, she says." Sarah heard a muffled male voice through the phone, sharp, stressed. Then another voice, younger, almost pleading. Jennifer's face went from pale to ghost white as she listened. "Yes, sir, she has military ID. She seems legitimate." Pause. "Her name is Captain Sarah Chen, service number 2847 Golf Charlie." Pause. "Yes, sir, right away." Jennifer hung up the phone. When she looked at Sarah, there was something new in her eyes. Not just hope, desperation. "The captain says they've lost primary hydraulics. The rudder isn't responding properly. They're struggling to control the aircraft's heading." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Captain Webb says if you're really a fighter pilot, he needs you up there now." Sarah felt something ignite in her chest. Not fear, not even adrenaline. It was purpose, pure, crystalline purpose. The same feeling she'd had every time she'd strapped into her F-22, every time she'd pushed the throttle forward and felt that massive aircraft respond to her will. For 3 years she'd been running from this feeling, running from the responsibility, the pressure, the weight of lives depending on her decisions. Jake's death had made her doubt everything, her judgment, her skills, her right to make calls that could end in tragedy. But these people didn't have the luxury of her self-doubt. These 157 passengers needed the pilot she used to be, not the broken consultant she'd become. Jennifer moved aside, clearing the path to the cockpit. Her hand hovered over the door release. "Please," she whispered, "please save us." Sarah Chen straightened her spine. She wasn't wearing a flight suit. She wasn't strapped into an ejection seat. She didn't have the most advanced fighter jet in the world responding to her every command. But she was still a pilot. That had never changed. "I'm going to do everything I can," Sarah said. Then she added with the confidence of someone who defied death at Mach 2, Tell the passengers to brace for emergency landing procedures. And Jennifer, start securing the cabin. We're going to make it through this." Jennifer nodded, wiping her eyes, and hit the door release. The cockpit door swung open, revealing a scene of controlled chaos. Warning lights painted everything red. Alarms screamed. Two men in captain's uniforms wrestled with controls that clearly weren't responding properly. And Captain Marcus Webb, silver-haired and granite-faced, turned his head just enough to meet Sarah's eyes. "Are you really a Raptor pilot?" he barked over the noise. Sarah stepped into the cockpit and closed the door behind her. "Yes, sir, and I'm here to help you land this bird." Webb's jaw clenched. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Then strap in, Captain, because we're about to find out if those fighter pilot skills translate to a 737 with one engine and half its flight controls shot to hell." Sarah grabbed the jump seat and buckled in, her eyes already scanning the instrument panel. Altitude, 36,000 feet and falling. Airspeed, erratic. Hydraulic pressure, critical. Engine 2 failed. Engine 1 stressed but holding. They had maybe 20 minutes to figure out how to land this aircraft before physics made the decision for them. The clock was ticking. And Captain Sarah Viper Chin was back in the fight. The cockpit was a war zone. Sarah's eyes swept across the instrument panel in the fraction of a second it took to buckle into the jump seat behind the pilots. Years of training had taught her to process information in milliseconds, the same way she'd assess threat displays while missiles tracked her F-22. But even with her experience, the sheer number of warning lights made her chest tighten. Master caution, engine fire, hydraulic pressure, flight control malfunction, cabin pressure, every alarm that could scream was screaming. Captain Marcus Webb sat in the left seat, his silver hair dark with sweat, his hands white-knuckled on the yoke. He was maybe 60, with the weathered face of a pilot who'd seen everything, until today. His uniform shirt was soaked through, and a vein throbbed in his temple as he fought the controls. In the right seat, First Officer David Torres looked like he was 20 seconds from a complete breakdown. He couldn't have been more than 30, baby-faced with wide, terrified eyes. His hands shook on the throttle, and Sarah could see his chest heaving with panicked breaths. "Status report," Sarah snapped, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. It was pure military command, no emotion, just the demand for information. "What systems do we still have?" Webb shot her a glance, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. He was deciding whether to trust her or not. Then another shudder ripped through the aircraft, and he made his choice. "Engine 2 is completely dead, catastrophic turbine failure," Webb said, his voice strained but professional. "We're flying on Engine 1 only, but it's running hot. Temperatures in the red. We push it much harder and we'll lose it too." "Hydraulic systems?" Sarah asked, leaning forward to see the gauges. "System A is gone. System B is at 30% and dropping." Tor's voice cracked. "We've lost primary flight controls. The rudder's barely responding. We can't maintain heading." Sarah's mind raced. On a commercial aircraft like this 737, hydraulic systems controlled almost everything. The rudder, elevators, ailerons, even the landing gear. Lose hydraulics, and you're essentially flying a 150,000-pound glider with the aerodynamics of a brick. "What about manual reversion?" she asked. Webb shook his head. "We're trying, but with System B this low, manual inputs are sluggish. The aircraft wants to roll left from the asymmetric thrust. I'm using full right aileron just to keep us level, and my arms are already screaming." Sarah could see it in the way the yoke was positioned, cranked hard to the right, fighting against the dead engine's drag on the left side. In her F-22, she dealt with asymmetric thrust during training, one engine out while supersonic was a nightmare scenario. But she'd had fly-by-wire controls, backup systems, and an ejection seat. This commercial aircraft had none of those luxuries. "Altitude?" she asked. 35,000 and descending at 800 feet per minute, Torres said, checking his instruments with shaking hands. We're trying to level off, but every time we reduce throttle on engine 1 to slow our descent, we lose airspeed and the nose drops. Sarah did the math in her head. 35,000 feet at 800 feet per minute meant they had maybe 40 minutes before they hit the ground. Less if the descent rate increased. But they couldn't stay at altitude forever. They needed to get to an airport and fast. "Where's the nearest suitable airport?" she asked. "Pittsburgh International," Webb said. 220 miles northeast, but I don't know if we can make it, not with these control issues. "Show me the navigation display." Torres punched up the screen between them. Sarah studied it with the intensity of a fighter pilot planning an attack run. Pittsburgh was their best bet, a major airport with long runways, emergency equipment, and the infrastructure to handle a disaster. But the route would take them over the Appalachian Mountains, and with their limited control authority, turbulence could be fatal. "What's the weather at Pittsburgh?" Sarah asked. Torres pulled up the METAR aviation weather report. His face somehow went even paler. Scattered clouds at 3,000 feet, winds gusting to 35 knots from the northwest, temperature dropping, possible icing conditions. "Jesus," Webb muttered. "We can't handle crosswinds in this condition. We'll cartwheel off the runway." Sarah's jaw clenched. She'd landed in worse conditions. Nighttime carrier approaches in the Persian Gulf, sandstorms in Afghanistan, emergency landings with battle damage. But she'd been in an aircraft designed for extreme conditions, with controls that responded instantly to her inputs. This was different. This was a wounded civilian aircraft with 157 people on board who didn't sign up for combat. "Captain Webb," Sarah said, forcing calm into her voice, "I need you to trust me. I've landed damaged aircraft before. The principles are the same whether it's an F-22 or a 737. Physics doesn't care what logo is on the fuselage." Webb looked at her, really looked at her. She could see him taking in her steady hands, her calm demeanor, the way she'd immediately started analyzing solutions instead of panicking. "Torres told me you have combat experience," Webb said. "3 tour, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. I've been shot at, locked up by SAMs, and had systems fail at Mach 2. Sarah met his eyes. "I've also brought aircraft home that everyone said wouldn't make it. I'm still here. So are the aircraft." A loud bang echoed through the cockpit. The plane shook violently. Torres yelped, gripping his armrests. Sarah's head whipped to the engine instruments. "Engine 1 temperature spiking," Torres shouted. "We're losing it." Sarah leaned forward, reading the gauges. Engine 1, their only working engine, was running dangerously hot. The turbine temperature was in the red zone, approaching critical limits. If it failed, they'd be a glider. A very heavy, very aerodynamically unstable glider. "Reduce throttle," Sarah ordered. "You're overstressing it trying to maintain altitude." "If I reduce throttle, we'll descend faster," Webb argued. "If you don't reduce throttle, that engine will fail and we'll descend a lot faster," Sarah shot back. "We need to accept we're coming down. The question is whether we come down controlled or uncontrolled." Webb hesitated for just a second, then pulled back the throttle. The engine temperature began to drop, but so did their altitude. The vertical speed indicator showed 1,200 feet per minute descent now. "Pittsburgh approach, this is United 1247, Webb said into his radio, his voice remarkably steady. "We have a double emergency. Engine failure, fire, and hydraulic failure. Request priority handling and emergency equipment standing by." The controller's voice came back, professional but urgent. "United 1247, Pittsburgh approach, roger your emergency. You are cleared direct Pittsburgh, descend and maintain flight level 240. Emergency equipment is being deployed. What is your souls on board and fuel remaining?" 157 souls, Torres replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Fuel is approximately 12,000 pounds. 12,000 pounds. Enough for maybe 90 minutes at current consumption, but that assumed the remaining engine didn't fail. Sarah did the math again. They'd make it to Pittsburgh with fuel to spare, but only if everything went perfectly. And nothing about this situation was perfect. Captain Chen, Webb said, using her rank deliberately. It was an acknowledgement, a sign of respect. I've been flying for 35 years, 20,000 flight hours, but I've never dealt with anything like this. If you've got ideas, I'm listening. Sarah felt the weight of those words. He was asking her to take charge, to use her expertise to save these people. The same responsibility she'd run from when Jake died. The same pressure that had driven her from the cockpit to a cubicle. But this time, running wasn't an option. Okay, Sarah said, her voice steady and sure. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to use differential thrust to help with directional control. We'll micro-adjust the throttle on engine 1 to supplement the sluggish rudder. We'll need to come in fast and hot because we can't risk another go-around. And we're going to plan for a manual gear extension because I guarantee the hydraulics will be toast by the time we reach pattern altitude. Torres stared at her like she'd just spoken in Mandarin. Webb's eyebrows rose. You can do that, Webb asked. Compensate for rudder loss with throttle. I've done it before, Sarah said. Not in a 737, her mind added, but Webb didn't need to hear that. Different aircraft, same principles. It's going to be rough and we'll only get one shot at the runway, but it'll work. Another alarm blared. The master caution light flashed again. Hydraulic system B just failed, Torres said, his voice climbing toward panic. We're on backup only. We've lost almost everything. The yoke in Webb's hands went mushy. Sarah could see it in the way he had to use more force to get the same response. The aircraft was dying around them, systems failing one by one like dominoes falling. 33,000 feet, Torres called out. Rate of descent increasing, 1,500 feet per minute. They had maybe 20 minutes before they had to attempt a landing, with barely any controls. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, but her hands remained steady. She'd trained for this. Maybe not in this exact aircraft, maybe not with this exact emergency, but the fundamentals were the same. Fly the aircraft, maintain control, get everyone home. All right, gentlemen, Sarah said, channeling every ounce of confidence she'd ever had in a cockpit. Let's bring this bird home. Pitch is climbing 3 degrees, 4 degrees, Sarah called out, her eyes locked on the artificial horizon. Ease back on the yoke, Captain, gently. Webb pulled back, but the response was sluggish. The nose of the aircraft continued to rise despite his input, the failing hydraulics making every control movement feel like pushing through molasses. At this angle, they were bleeding airspeed dangerously fast. Airspeed dropping 210 knots, 200, Torres said, his voice climbing with panic. Stall warning in 15 knots. Don't fight it, Sarah commanded. Let the nose drop slightly. We need airspeed more than altitude right now. Webb's instincts screamed against it. Every pilot was trained to maintain altitude in an emergency, but he trusted Sarah's combat experience and eased the yoke forward. The nose dropped, the aircraft angled downward, and the airspeed stabilized at 195 knots. Good, Sarah said. Now listen carefully. With System B gone, we're flying on minimal hydraulic pressure. Every input you make needs to be small and smooth. Think of it like landing on ice, overcorrect and we'll spin out. The plane shuddered as they descended through 31,000 feet. The wounded aircraft groaned and creaked, metal protesting against forces it was never designed to handle. Sarah could feel the asymmetric thrust through the floor, the dead left engine creating drag, while the overworked right engine struggled to compensate. United 1247 Pittsburgh approach, the radio crackled. We have you on radar. Descend and maintain 15,000. Expect vectors for ILS runway 28 right. Webb keyed the mic. Pittsburgh, United 1247. Be advised, we have minimal flight control authority. We may not be able to comply with all vectors. Request the longest runway and straighten approach if possible. United 1247. Understand limited control. Runway 28 right is 11,500 feet. Winds currently 310 at 25 gusting to 35. You're cleared direct to the outer marker. Maintain maximum forward speed you're comfortable with. Sarah's mind processed the information like a computer. 11,000 feet of runway, plenty of length, but those crosswinds were brutal. A 35-knot gust hitting them on final approach with barely any rudder control could flip them into a cartwheel. She'd seen it happen in training videos. It was never survivable. We need to talk about the crosswind, Sarah said quietly, so only Webb and Torres could hear. With minimal rudder authority, we can't do a normal crosswind correction. We're going to have to crab the entire approach and kick straight at the last second. That's insane, Torres whispered. We'll never get aligned in time. You have a better idea. Sarah's voice was sharp but not unkind. Because I'm open to suggestions, but we're at 29,000 feet and dropping, so we need to decide now. Torres swallowed hard and shook his head. Webb's jaw clenched. What do you need from us? Before Sarah could answer, a new alarm blared, high-pitched and insistent. The fire warning for Engine 1. No, 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 Torres shouted, pointing at the engine display. Fire in Engine 1, we're going to lose it. Sarah leaned forward, reading the instruments. The engine temperature had spiked again, and now there were flames visible in the exhaust. But something didn't look right. The fire detection system was showing intermittent warnings, flashing on and off. It's a false alarm, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. Look at the EGT exhaust gas temperature. It's high but stable. If we had an actual fire, it would be climbing. The sensor's damaged from the vibration. Are you sure? Webb asked. 90%, Sarah admitted. But we can't shut down this engine based on a faulty sensor. If I'm wrong, the fire suppression system will activate automatically. If I'm right and we shut it down, we're gliding. Webb made his decision in 2 seconds. We keep it running. Torres, monitor that temperature like your life depends on it, because it does. The plane dropped through 27,000 feet. The rate of descent was increasing, 800 feet per minute now. At this rate, they'd slam into the mountains before reaching Pittsburgh. We need to slow the descent, Sarah said. Increase throttle on Engine 1 just a touch. The temperature, Torres protested. I know, Sarah cut him off. But we're descending too fast. We need the thrust. Increase power 5%. Webb pushed the throttle forward slightly. The engine responded, the whine increasing, and their descent rate decreased to 1,400 feet per minute. But the temperature gauge crept higher into the red zone. We're trading descent rate for engine life, Sarah explained. Every second we keep that engine running hot is a second closer to catastrophic failure. But every second we descend too fast is a second closer to controlled flight into terrain. It's a balancing act. Behind them, through the cockpit door, they could hear the chaos in the cabin. Crying, praying. Someone was singing, maybe to calm themselves, maybe because they thought these were their last moments. Sarah blocked it out. She'd learned that skill over hostile territory, the ability to compartmentalize, to focus only on what she could control. 25,000 feet, Torres called. Pittsburgh is 180 miles. Sarah did the math. At their current ground speed of 380 knots and descent rate, they'd arrive at pattern altitude, about 3,000 feet, with maybe 5 miles to spare. It was going to be tight, terrifyingly tight. Captain Webb, Sarah said, I need you to start a slow turn to the right. We need to bleed off some speed and set up for the approach course. Use the throttle to help. Reduce power slightly as you turn. Webb began the turn, his movements careful and deliberate. The aircraft banked, 5 degrees, 8 degrees, 10 degrees, but the sluggish controls made the turn feel like steering a cruise ship. They were covering miles with every second, the aircraft reluctant to change direction. Rolls not stopping, Webb grunted, fighting the yoke. Ailerons aren't responding. Opposite throttle, Sarah barked. Reduce power now. Webb yanked the throttle back. The asymmetric thrust helped roll the aircraft back to level, but now they were descending faster again, 2,000 feet per minute. This is impossible, Torres said, his voice breaking. We can't control heading, we can't control bank, we can't even maintain altitude. How are we supposed to land this thing? Sarah reached forward and gripped his shoulder hard enough to hurt. Torres jumped, looking back at her with wide, terrified eyes. Listen to me, David, she said, using his first name deliberately. I have landed aircraft with battle damage, with hydraulic failures, with engines on fire. I've brought jets home that had holes in the fuselage and controls shot to hell. And you know what the difference is between landing and crashing? Torres shook his head mutely. The difference is that I never stopped flying. Not for 1 second. Fear is fine, I'm scared too, but we keep flying. We keep making inputs. We keep solving problems. Because the second we give up is the second everyone on this aircraft dies. Do you understand me? Torres nodded, some of the panic leaving his eyes. I understand. Good. Now I need you to calculate our fuel remaining at current consumption rate and give me a number. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Torres turned back to his instruments, his hands steadier now that he had a specific task. The aircraft shuddered again, harder this time. Sarah felt it through her seat, a deep vibration that spoke of structural stress. The dead engine was still attached to the wing, its weight and drag putting enormous strain on the airframe. Every mile they flew was another mile of metal fatigue, another chance for something catastrophic to break. 22,000 feet, Webb said. He sounded tired, exhausted. His arms had to be screaming from fighting the controls for 20 minutes straight. I've got 8,000 pounds of fuel remaining, Torres reported. At current consumption, that's about 60 minutes. 60 minutes. They'd make it to Pittsburgh with fuel to spare. If the engine held together, if the hydraulics didn't fail completely, if the airframe didn't come apart from stress. So many ifs. United 1247, Pittsburgh approach. You're 40 miles from the outer marker. Descend to 6,000 feet. Emergency equipment is in position. Roger, Pittsburgh, Webb replied. Descending to 6,000. Be advised, our descent rate is higher than normal and we may be unable to level at 6,000. Understood, 1247. You are cleared for the approach. Winds now 320 at 30, gusting to 38. The winds were getting worse. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. They were about to attempt a landing that would challenge a perfectly functioning aircraft with a full crew. With their crippled 737, it was going to take everything they had. And maybe a miracle. Captain Webb, Sarah said quietly, when we get to final approach, I'm going to need you to give me verbal confirmation on every input I call out. Torres, you'll handle throttle based on my commands. We're going to fly this as a 3-person crew. 1 brain, 6 hands. Webb nodded grimly. Whatever you need, Captain Chen. Sarah took a deep breath. Through the windscreen she could see the mountains below, the Appalachians stretching endlessly, covered in autumn trees, beautiful and deadly. They were committed now, Pittsburgh or nothing. 18,000 feet, Torres said. Rate of descent 2,200 feet per minute. They were falling from the sky. A wounded bird fighting gravity with everything it had. And Sarah Chen was going to make damn sure they won that fight. Pittsburgh International Airport materialized through the haze like a mirage in the desert. Sarah could see it through the windscreen, runways laid out in dark strips against the Pennsylvania landscape, Emergency vehicles already positioned like toy cars, their lights flashing red and blue even in the afternoon sun. 15 miles to outer marker, Torres called out, his voice steadier now but still tight with tension. Altitude 10,000 feet. They were coming in too high and too fast. Sarah knew it. Webb knew it. But with their limited control authority, a standard approach pattern was impossible. They'd have to dive for the runway and hope they could bleed off enough speed before touchdown. Pittsburgh Tower, United 1247, Webb said into the radio. We have the field in sight. Request confirmation all runways are clear and emergency equipment is standing by. United 1247, Pittsburgh Tower, affirmative. Runway 28 right is cleared and isolated. Emergency equipment in position. Winds 310 at 32, gusting to 40. You are cleared to land. 40-knot gusts. Sarah felt her jaw clench. In her F-22, she'd landed in worse carrier approaches at night with the deck pitching in 30-foot swells. But that was a fighter jet designed for extreme conditions, with flight controls that responded in milliseconds. This 737 was like flying a drunk elephant. We need to configure for landing, Sarah said. Gear and flaps, but we're going to have problems. What kind of problems? Webb asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Hydraulic failure means the landing gear might not extend normally. We'll probably have to use manual extension. Sarah pointed to the emergency gear extension handle, a red T-shaped lever near Webb's left knee. And flaps will be limited. We might only get partial extension. Torres made a small whimpering sound. Landing with partial flaps means we'll be coming in at, 170 knots? Closer to 180, Sarah confirmed. Which means we'll need every foot of that 11,000-foot runway and then some. Webb's face was grim. Let's start with the gear. Torres, select gear down. Torres reached for the gear lever with a shaking hand and moved it to the DOWN position. They waited, watching the 3 green indicator lights that would confirm all landing gear was down and locked. One light illuminated, then another. The third stayed dark. Nose gear shows unsafe, Torres said, his voice climbing again. Main gear down and locked, but nose gear won't confirm. Sarah had expected this. Manual extension. Captain Webb, I'll talk you through it. Webb's hand found the red T-handle. I've done this in the simulator maybe twice in 35 years. Then this will be your third time, Sarah said with forced confidence. Pull the handle straight out, then rotate 90 degrees clockwise. It'll mechanically release the uplocks and let gravity drop the gear. Webb gripped the handle. Here goes nothing. He pulled hard. The handle resisted for a moment, then came free with a metallic clunk that reverberated through the cockpit. He rotated it clockwise. Somewhere below them, mechanical systems engaged with a series of grinding sounds that made Sarah's teeth hurt. They waited. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. The third green light flickered, then illuminated solid. Nose gear down and locked, Torres shouted, almost laughing with relief. We have 3 greens. Small victories, Sarah muttered. Now for flaps, select flaps 5. Torres moved the flap lever. The flap position indicator began moving, but slowly, far too slowly. It crept to 3 degrees and stopped. Flaps aren't extending, Torres said. We're stuck at 3 degrees. Hydraulic pressure is too low, Sarah explained. She'd expected this too, but it still made her situation worse. We'll have to land with what we've got. 3 degrees of flaps, gear down, coming in hot and heavy. Webb wiped sweat from his forehead. This is going to be the fastest landing I've ever attempted. 8 miles to touchdown, Torres called. Altitude 6,000 feet. Sarah leaned forward, analyzing their approach path. They were still too high. At their current descent rate and distance, they'd overshoot the runway threshold by 1,000 feet or more. We need to increase descent rate, Sarah said. Reduce power to idle. Idle, Webb's head snapped toward her. We'll drop like a rock. We're already too high. If we don't get down now, we'll float halfway down the runway and run out of concrete. Sarah kept her voice calm but firm. Trust me, Captain. Idle power, now. Webb pulled the throttle to idle. The engine noise decreased to a whisper, and immediately their descent rate jumped to 2,500 feet per minute. The ground rushed up at them, the altimeter unwinding rapidly. 4,000 feet, Torres said, watching the altitude melt away. 3,500, 3,000. The plane was falling fast, but Sarah watched the approach angle carefully. This was the gamble. Drop too fast and they'd slam into the ground short of the runway. Don't drop fast enough and they'd overshoot and have nowhere to go. 2,500 feet, Torres called, his voice tight. 2,000. Descent rate 3,000 feet per minute. Hold it, Sarah said, watching the runway grow larger through the windscreen. Hold it, not yet. The ground proximity warning system activated. Terrain, terrain, pull up, pull up. Torres flinched at the robotic voice. Webb's hands tightened on the yoke, his instinct screaming to pull back, to climb, to get away from the ground. But he held steady, trusting Sarah's judgment. 1,500 feet, Torres said. 1,000, we're coming in way too fast. Power up, Sarah commanded. 50% power now. Webb shoved the throttle forward. The engine roared back to life, the surge of thrust catching them just as they dropped below 800 feet. Their descent rate decreased, 2,000 feet per minute, 1,500, 1,000. But the crosswind hit them like a fist. The plane lurched sideways, the 40-knot gust shoving them 30 feet to the left of the center line. Webb fought the controls, trying to bring them back, but the sluggish hydraulics made every input a battle. Right rudder, Sarah shouted. Throttle up another 10%. Webb mashed the rudder pedal and increased power. The asymmetric thrust helped swing the nose right, bringing them back toward the center line. But they were crabbing. The nose pointed 15 degrees right of the runway heading, the aircraft sliding sideways through the air like a car drifting on ice. 500 feet, Torres called. 400, airspeed 195 knots. Through the windscreen, Sarah could see the runway threshold markers rushing toward them. Emergency vehicles lined both sides, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars. Foam trucks were positioned at midfield, ready to spray if they crashed and burned. She couldn't let that happen. 300 feet, Torres said. 250, speed 185. The crosswind gusted again. The plane rolled 10 degrees left, the wing dipping toward the ground. Webb fought it back, overcorrected, and they rolled right. They were oscillating, the aircraft porpoising through the air, barely under control. 200 feet, Torres' voice was breaking. 150. We're not aligned, we're 30 degrees off centerline. Kick it straight, Sarah commanded. Full left rudder, reduce power 20%. Webb slammed the rudder pedal and yanked the throttle back. The nose swung left, too much, too fast. They were going to overshoot the center line on the other side. Opposite rudder, right rudder. Sarah was shouting now, her calm facade cracking as they entered the critical final seconds. Hold it, steady, steady. 100 feet, Torres said, and Sarah could hear the tears in his voice. 50 feet. Oh God, we're going to crash. The runway filled the windscreen. Sarah could see individual cracks in the concrete, could read the painted numbers. 28R, this was it. The moment of truth. Either they landed this aircraft or 157 people died. Including her. Flare, Sarah screamed, pull back now. Webb hauled back on the yoke with every ounce of strength he had left. The nose pitched up, the aircraft's attitude shifting from descent to level flight. For one perfect second, they were flying parallel to the runway, 20 feet up, bleeding off speed. Then gravity won. The main landing gear hit the concrete with a sound like a gunshot. The impact was brutal, violent, teeth-rattling. Sarah's head snapped forward against her restraints. Warning lights exploded across the panel. The plane bounced, 15 feet back into the air. "Stay with it," Sarah yelled. "Don't let it balloon." Webb pushed forward on the yoke, forcing the nose down. They hit again, harder this time. The nose gear slammed into the runway with enough force to shatter the cockpit coffee cup, spraying lukewarm coffee across the instrument panel. But they were down. "Thrust reversers," Sarah commanded. "Full reverse, stand on the brakes." Webb deployed the thrust reversers on their single working engine. The aircraft shuddered as the reverser doors opened, redirecting engine thrust forward to slow them down. Torres was already on the brakes, pressing the pedals with both feet. But they were going 180 knots. On a wet runway, with only one thrust reverser. The plane screamed down the runway, barely decelerating. Sarah watched the distance markers flash past. 9,000 feet remaining, 8,000 feet, 7,000 feet. They were eating up runway like a hungry beast. "We're not stopping," Torres screamed. "We're going to run out of runway." The end of the runway loomed ahead. A fence, then grass, then a steep drop-off into a ravine. If they went off the end at this speed, the aircraft would cartwheel and explode. "Emergency brakes," Sarah shouted. "Maximum braking." Webb activated the emergency brake system, the last resort, the brakes that would either stop them or blow every tire on the aircraft. The tires screamed. Smoke poured from the wheels. The smell of burning rubber filled the cockpit. 6,000 feet remaining, 5,000 feet, 4,000 feet. They were still going too fast. Sarah gripped her seat restraints and prayed to gods she wasn't sure she believed in. The aircraft began to slow, 160 knots, 140 knots, 120 knots. 3,000 feet remaining. 100 knots, 80 knots. 2,000 feet remaining. 60 knots, 40 knots. 1,000 feet remaining. The aircraft rolled slower and finally, mercifully, came to a complete stop. 500 feet from the end of the runway. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just sat there, breathing alive. Then Torres started laughing. Hysterical, relief-filled laughter that bordered on crying. Webb's hands were shaking so badly, he couldn't release the controls. And Sarah Chen sat back in the jump seat, closed her eyes, and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 years. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. The silence in the cockpit lasted exactly 7 seconds. Then the radio exploded with voices. "United 1247, Pittsburgh Tower, confirm you are stopped safely. Do you require assistance?" Webb's hand trembled so violently he could barely key the microphone. "Pittsburgh Tower, United 1247 is stopped on runway 28 right. We are down safe. All passengers accounted for. Requesting emergency evacuation." "Roger 1247. Emergency vehicles are approaching now. Outstanding work, crew." Through the windscreen, Sarah could see fire trucks and ambulances racing toward them, their lights painting the aircraft in strobing red and blue. Foam trucks positioned themselves on both sides, ready to spray if any fire erupted from the overheated brakes or damaged engine. Behind them in the cabin, there was absolute pandemonium. People were crying, screaming, laughing hysterically. Someone started singing Amazing Grace, and within seconds half the cabin had joined in. Others were on their phones, frantically calling loved ones. Sarah could hear fragments through the cockpit door. "We're alive, Mom, we're alive. And I love you so much, and I thought I'd never see you again." Torres unbuckled his restraints with shaking hands and turned to Sarah. His face was wet with tears, his eyes red. "You saved us," he said, his voice breaking. "We would have died, all of us. You saved our lives." Sarah didn't know what to say. Her own hands were trembling now, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a freight train. We all did it together, she managed. It was a team. No, Captain Webb had released his controls and turned to face her. His weathered face was pale, streaked with sweat, but his eyes were clear and direct. Tors is right. Without you in this cockpit, without your training and experience, we would have crashed. There's no doubt in my mind. You are the reason 157 people are going home tonight. The weight of those words hit Sarah like a physical blow. 157 people, 157 lives, families, children, parents, friends, all of them alive because she'd walked into this cockpit and refused to give up. Jennifer burst through the cockpit door, her face streaked with makeup and tears. We need to evacuate. The emergency slides are deployed, and she stopped when she saw Sarah. For a moment, the young flight attendant just stared. Then she crossed the cockpit in 2 steps and threw her arms around Sarah, sobbing into her shoulder. Thank you, Jennifer whispered. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Sarah awkwardly patted her back, overwhelmed by the emotion. She wasn't used to this. In the military, you did your job, filed your report, and moved on. There were no tearful reunions, no dramatic celebrations. You saved lives because that was the mission. But this felt different, this felt personal. We need to evacuate, Sarah said gently, pulling back from Jennifer's embrace. The aircraft is damaged, we can't stay here. Webb nodded and activated the cabin intercom. His voice, when he spoke, was remarkably steady. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are safely on the ground at Pittsburgh International Airport. Please remain calm and listen to your flight attendants. We will be evacuating via emergency slides. Leave all belongings behind and move quickly but carefully to the exits. The evacuation was controlled chaos. Sarah followed Webb and Tors out of the cockpit and into the cabin. What she saw made her throat tighten. Passengers were helping each other toward the exits. A businessman in a suit was carrying an elderly woman who couldn't walk fast enough. A teenager was clutching a crying toddler, shepherding the child toward the slide while the mother gathered her other children. People who'd been strangers 90 minutes ago were now holding hands, supporting each other, moving together toward safety. Sarah stood at the overwing exit, helping guide passengers to the slide. Sit down, push off, arms crossed over your chest, she repeated over and over. You're doing great. Keep moving, you're safe now. A middle-aged woman stopped in front of her, gripping Sarah's arm. Are you the pilot, the one who helped save us? Sarah started to deflect, but the woman didn't give her a chance. My daughter is on this plane, the woman said, tears streaming down her face. She pointed to a teenager sliding down the evacuation chute. She's 14. She has her whole life ahead of her. Because of you, she gets to live it. Thank you so much. The woman hugged Sarah fiercely, then moved to the exit and slid down to safety. Sarah's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, forcing back tears. She couldn't break down now, not yet. There were still people to evacuate. Ma'am, can you help me? Sarah turned to see a young man, couldn't have been more than 25, cradling his arm. Blood seeped through his fingers from a gash on his forearm, probably from when luggage had exploded from the overhead bins. I've got you, Sarah said, guiding him to the exit. Medics are waiting at the bottom. You're going to be fine. I'm getting married next month, the young man said, his voice shaking. I thought I'd never make it to my wedding. You'll make it, Sarah assured him, and you'll have one hell of a story to tell at the reception. He laughed weakly and slid down the chute. The cabin emptied gradually. Families reunited at the bottom of the slides, holding each other and crying. Emergency responders moved among them, checking for injuries, offering blankets and water. Sarah watched through the exit door as a little girl, maybe 6 years old, ran into her father's arms. The man fell to his knees, clutching his daughter and sobbing openly. That's when it truly hit Sarah. These weren't just 157 souls. They were 157 people with families who loved them, with futures waiting for them, with dreams and hopes and plans that would have died if this aircraft had crashed. And she'd helped save them all. "Captain Chen," Jennifer appeared at her elbow. "Everyone's off. You're the last one. You need to evacuate now." Sarah looked around the empty cabin one last time. Oxygen masks still dangled from the ceiling. Luggage was scattered everywhere. The emergency lights cast everything in that eerie red glow. This aircraft, this Boeing 737 that had nearly become a coffin, had held together just long enough to get everyone home. "Let's go," Sarah said quietly. She slid down the evacuation chute, the rough fabric burning her hands slightly as she descended. Her feet hit the tarmac, and immediately a paramedic was at her side. "Are you injured, ma'am?" "I'm fine," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure that was true. Her legs felt like rubber, her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and her heart was racing so fast she thought it might explode. "Sarah, Captain Chen." She turned to see Captain Webb pushing through the crowd of first responders. Torres was right behind him, along with Jennifer and the other flight attendants. They reached her as a group, and suddenly she was surrounded by people hugging her, thanking her, crying and laughing all at once. "You're a hero," Torres said, gripping her hand with both of his. "A genuine, honest-to-God hero." "I'm not," Sarah started, but Webb cut her off. "Yes, you are. Accept it, own it. You earned it today." A news helicopter circled overhead, cameras recording everything. Sarah looked up at it, then at the gathered emergency vehicles, the survivors being treated by paramedics, the families reuniting in tearful embraces. This was real. This had actually happened. She'd walked away from flying 3 years ago, convinced she couldn't trust herself anymore, convinced that Jake's death meant she wasn't good enough. But today, when it mattered most, she'd remembered who she really was. Captain Sarah Viper Chen, fighter pilot, combat veteran, someone who didn't quit when things got hard. Someone who saved lives. A little girl broke free from her mother and ran up to Sarah, throwing her small arms around Sarah's legs. "You're a superhero," the child said, looking up with huge, adoring eyes. "Like Wonder Woman." Sarah knelt down to the girl's level, a genuine smile breaking across her face for the first time in what felt like years. "Not a superhero, sweetie, just a pilot who remembered how to fly." The girl's mother approached, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing us home." Sarah stood, watching as the mother gathered her daughter and rejoined her family. All around her, people were alive, breathing, holding each other, because she'd refused to give up. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen showed dozens of missed calls and messages, but one caught her eye immediately. A text from Colonel Sarah Reston, her old squadron commander at Langley. "Just saw the news. Holy hell, Viper, we need to talk. Call me ASAP. The Air Force needs pilots like you. We need you." Sarah stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button. For 3 years she'd been running. Maybe it was time to stop. Maybe it was time to come home. 2 hours later, Sarah stood in the Pittsburgh International Airport terminal, still wearing her coffee-stained blouse and wrinkled slacks, staring at her reflection in a window overlooking the tarmac. The crippled 737 sat on the runway like a wounded bird, surrounded by investigators and emergency crews. Even from here, she could see the charred remains of the left engine, the foam covering portions of the fuselage, the deployed emergency slides hanging limply from the doors. It looked like something that should have killed everyone on board. But everyone had lived. "Captain Chen," a woman's voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah turned to find a reporter with perfectly styled hair and a cameraman in tow. "I'm Michelle Rodriguez from Channel 4 News. Can we have a moment of your time? The passengers are calling you a hero. They say you saved." "No comment," Sarah said, turning away. She wasn't ready for this. Wasn't ready for cameras and questions and people making her out to be something she wasn't. but the passengers say you're a former fighter pilot who stepped in when. I said no comment. Sarah's voice was sharper than she intended. The reporter looked offended, but Sarah didn't care. She walked away quickly, navigating through the crowded terminal where families were still reuniting, where passengers from Flight 1247 were being interviewed, photographed, treated like survivors of a war. Which, in a way, they were. Sarah found a quiet corner near a closed gate and collapsed into a plastic airport chair. Her whole body ached. Her hands were blistered from gripping the jump seat restraints during landing. Her head pounded from adrenaline crash and dehydration. But she was alive. They were all alive. Her phone rang. Colonel Reston's name flashed on the screen. Sarah stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Colonel." "Viper?" Colonel Sarah Reston's voice was warm, familiar, like coming home after a long deployment. "I've been watching the news for the last hour. Every channel is covering the emergency landing. They're calling it a miracle. Passengers are saying a mysterious woman pilot saved them." "It wasn't just me," Sarah said quietly. "Captain Webb and First Officer Torres." "Cut the humble act, Sarah. I know you, I trained you, and I know what you're capable of." Reston paused. "The question is, do you remember what you're capable of?" Sarah closed her eyes. 3 years ago, she'd stood in Colonel Reston's office at Langley Air Force Base and handed in her resignation. Reston had tried to talk her out of it, had told her that Jake's death wasn't her fault, that the Air Force needed pilots like her. But Sarah hadn't listened. She'd been too broken, too convinced that she didn't deserve to fly anymore. "I remember," Sarah whispered into the phone. "Good, because we have an opening in the 27th Fighter Squadron. They need an experienced F-22 pilot who can handle high-stress situations and make life-or-death decisions under pressure." Reston's voice softened. "They need you, Sarah. More importantly, you need them. You need to fly again. Today proved that." Sarah's throat tightened. "I walked away for a reason, Colonel. Jake died because of a mechanical failure that 12 different investigators confirmed you could not have prevented," Reston interrupted firmly. "His ejection seat malfunctioned. The maintenance logs showed a defect that was missed during inspection. You did everything right, Sarah. Everything. But you've been punishing yourself for 3 years for something that wasn't your fault." Tears burned Sarah's eyes. She'd heard those words before, from the investigation board, from therapists, from friends. But she'd never believed them. How could she, when her best friend was dead and she was still alive? "I don't know if I can do it again," Sarah admitted. "What if?" "What if what? What if you save more lives? What if you train the next generation of pilots? What if you become the officer I always knew you could be?" Reston took a breath. "Sarah, today you saved 157 people using skills you learned in the Air Force. You proved you can handle pressure, make critical decisions, and keep your head when everyone else is panicking. That's exactly who we need leading our squadrons." Before Sarah could respond, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Captain Webb, First Officer Torres, and Jennifer, the flight attendant. Behind them were at least 20 passengers from the flight. "I have to go," Sarah said into the phone. "Think about it," Reston said. "The Air Force will always have a place for you. Always." The call ended. Sarah stood as the group reached her. "We've been looking everywhere for you," Webb said. "The airline wants to talk to you. The FAA wants to interview you. And these folks," he gestured to the passengers, "they wanted to thank you personally." The middle-aged woman Sarah had helped during the evacuation stepped forward. Her 14-year-old daughter was at her side, holding her hand. "I don't know how to thank you," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me more time with my daughter. You gave all of us more time with the people we love. How do you repay that kind of gift?" Sarah shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone." "No." The businessman who'd been typing on his laptop during the flight stepped forward. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie missing. "Don't minimize what you did. I've flown 2 million miles in my career. I know what a normal emergency looks like. What you did today was extraordinary." One by one, passengers came forward. Some shook her hand. Some hugged her. The young man who was getting married showed her a photo on his phone, his fiancée, smiling, beautiful, waiting for him. "She doesn't know yet," he said, wiping his eyes. "She's going to pick me up thinking it was just another normal flight. Because of you, I get to propose to her next month like we planned. I get to have a life with her." The little girl who'd called her a superhero pushed through the crowd and grabbed Sarah's hand. "Will you sign my book?" she asked, holding up a princess coloring book. "So I can remember the day Wonder Woman saved my life." Sarah's vision blurred. She accepted the crayon the girl offered and wrote on the inside cover, "To Emma, stay brave, dream big, and remember you can do anything. Captain Sarah Chen." The girl beamed and ran back to her mother. Tor stepped forward, his young face serious. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I've been flying for 6 years. I thought I was pretty good, but today I learned what a real pilot looks like. You didn't panic, you didn't freeze. You took command and saved all of us." He extended his hand. "It was an honor to fly with you, Captain Chen." Sarah shook his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Captain Webb was last. The older pilot's eyes were red-rimmed but clear. 35 years I've been flying, over 20,000 hours in the cockpit. I've seen a lot of pilots come and go, but I've never seen anyone handle an emergency with your level of skill and composure." He paused. "The Air Force lost a damn good pilot when you resigned. I hope they get you back." The words hit Sarah like a missile-lock warning, sudden, sharp, impossible to ignore. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had been running from the wrong thing. Jake's death had broken something inside her, made her doubt herself, made her think she didn't deserve to fly. But today, when lives were on the line, she'd remembered who she really was. Not someone broken, not someone afraid. A pilot, a warrior, someone who saved lives instead of mourning the one she couldn't save. "Thank you," Sarah said to Webb, to Tors, to all of them. "Thank you for trusting me." As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah pulled out her phone and stared at Colonel Reston's number. For 3 years she'd been hiding, working a job that meant nothing, living a life half-lived, afraid to embrace the thing she loved most because it hurt too much to remember what she'd lost. But pain was part of the package. Loss was part of being a warrior. Jake had known that. He'd accepted it every time he strapped into his F-22, every time he pushed the envelope, every time he trusted Sarah to have his back. And he'd want her to fly again. She knew that with absolute certainty. Sarah dialed the number. Reston answered on the first ring. That was quick. "When can I start?" Sarah asked. She could hear the smile in Reston's voice. "There's a flight to Colorado Springs tomorrow morning. Be on it. You'll process back in at the Air Force Academy, then report to Langley next week." "Yes, ma'am." Sarah felt something unfold in her chest, something that had been clenched tight for 3 years. Hope, purpose, home. "Welcome back, Viper," Reston said. "The Air Force missed you." The call ended. Sarah stood in the middle of the terminal, people streaming past her, announcements echoing overhead, life happening all around her. She thought about Jake, not the way he died, but the way he lived. Fearless, committed, always pushing to be better. He'd called her Viper because she struck fast and true, because she never gave up, because she was the best damn pilot he'd ever known. It was time to be that person again. Sarah looked out the window one last time at the damaged 737. Tomorrow, investigators would crawl through it, documenting every failure, every miracle that kept it airborne. They'd write reports, make recommendations, ensure it never happened again. But Sarah would remember it differently. She'd remember the moment she stopped running, the moment she remembered who she was, the moment 157 people lived because she refused to give up. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Emma's mom. She wanted me to tell you she's decided she wants to be a pilot when she grows up. Because of you. Thank you for being her hero." Sarah smiled, a real smile, the first one that felt genuine in 3 years, and typed back, "Tell Emma that heroes are just people who don't quit. She can be anything she dreams. Blue skis ahead." She sent the message, shouldered her bag, and walked toward the terminal exit. Tomorrow, she'd fly to Colorado Springs. Next week, she'd report to Langley. And somewhere in the future, she'd climb back into an F-22 Raptor and feel that incredible machine respond to her touch. But tonight she was just Captain Sarah, Viper, Chin, pilot, warrior, survivor, walking out of the airport into the cool Pennsylvania evening, finally ready to go home. The sky above Pittsburgh was clear, stars beginning to emerge in the deepening blue. Sarah looked up at them and whispered 2 words into the twilight. "Fly safe, Jake." Then she walked forward into the rest of her life, no longer running from the past, but flying toward the future. The end.